The previous video was about the diplomatic tensions between the Gulf countries and Lebanon, and I mentioned that all this circus charade that is happening now from the side of the Gulf countries against Lebanon has nothing to do with a single statement of the Minister of Information of Lebanon, which he said that the war on Yemen is unjust and absurd. And he said that even before he became a Minister of Information. So we don't know why the people digged in now and trying to use this as a pretext. But just think about it. Do you think countries like Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, all these countries will boycott Lebanon, cut diplomatic relations, ban imports from Lebanon because of a single statement by a Minister of Information? No. I mentioned in the previous video that the truth of the matter is that the Houthis, Ansarullah, the militants who are backed by Iran and Hezbollah in Yemen are advancing in the city of Ma'rib. And some of you were surprised why I'm saying that. The thing is, in the Middle East, all these fights are interconnected. And there are two camps that are clearly clashing in the Middle East for leverage and for geopolitical reasons, right? One of these camps is Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the rest of the Gulf countries, in exception for Qatar. And the other camp consists of Hezbollah, Iran, Ansarullah, and partly Syria, because Syria nowadays is, of course, it's in alliance and a strategic partnership with Iran and Hezbollah. But at the same time, it doesn't mind good relations with the UAE, for example, with Bahrain, with Kuwait. And there are also reports claim that Syria and Saudi Arabia will restore ties. So Syria wants to have good relations with these regional countries, in the exception of Turkey right now, because Turkey is an occupation force in Syria and it refuses to withdraw its occupation force. Now, why Ma'rib is very important? Ma'rib has 20% of Yemen's energy or oil resources. So hundreds of thousands of oil barrels are coming from Ma'rib. And if Ansarullah occupy, and it seems that they are on the way of occupying Ma'rib, and the Saudi-backed forces are receiving a blow, and they are losing the military war there. This is the indications when you read in the media and you follow the map of the control. But we don't know what may happen in the next days. But it seems that Ma'rib may fall in the hands of Ansarullah or the Houthis. And what Saudi Arabia and the UAE are doing, because they are backing the pro-Saudi militants against Ansarullah, they're trying to raise the tensions in Lebanon in order to force the USA to intervene on the side of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and stop the expansion of the Iranian influence in the region, which, according to the Saudis and the Emiratis, the Biden administration is not doing enough as the previous administration, Trump administration, was doing. So they have cut diplomatic relations with Lebanon and they stopped trading with Lebanon. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, and all these countries. And the UAE said that they permanently closed the embassy in Lebanon until the Lebanon restores its sovereignty. That means what I'm saying here is true. It's not about a statement from a minister here. It's about the entire situation in Lebanon, which is heading towards better, let's say, stances or better leverage for Hezbollah, Iran, and the allies of these parties in Lebanon, right? But let's remember a funny example here, because the UAE says that they will not restore relations with Lebanon until Lebanon reclaims its sovereignty. In November 2017, which means just 4 years from now, the former prime minister of Lebanon, Saad al-Hariri, he received an official invitation from Saudi Arabia, and he traveled to Saudi Arabia as he stepped out of the plane of his personal plane, private jet, Saudi Arabia kidnapped him. MBS ordered, Mohammed bin Salman ordered to kidnap the former prime minister of Lebanon, and they took him to custody in a hotel room, and they forced him to resign from his post as a prime minister of Lebanon, and they recorded him on a video, and they televised him later. They broadcasted that video later, and when the people knew that this is BS and the prime minister of Lebanon is kidnapped by Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia called a journalist who used to work for a TV channel in Lebanon called the Future TV, which is Rafiq or Saad al-Hariri, funded by Saad al-Hariri, and she's ironically Armenian, Paula Yakubian, and she traveled to Saudi Arabia and interviewed Saad al-Hariri to refute the allegations that he's not kidnapped. And if you watch the interview, it's pretty obvious that Saad was really nervous and he's like sweating, and it's pretty obvious that the guy was kidnapped. So who defended Saad al-Hariri despite the hostilities, political hostilities between them? Hezbollah and the Patriotic Movement. The Patriotic Movement is the biggest Christian political party in Lebanon, Free Patriotic Movement. So, and the allies of Saad al-Hariri in Lebanon, those who are allied with him in the 14 March coalition, they abandoned him. And the president of Lebanon, which is part of the Free Patriotic Movement, Michel Aoun, he activated international diplomacy headed by Macron. And Macron, he mediated, and they released Saad al-Hariri, and he came back to Lebanon as a prime minister. So when this happened, none of these Gulf countries said that we will cut relations with Lebanon until Lebanon restores or regains its sovereignty. The prime minister of Lebanon has the highest authority in executive authority in Lebanon, and they kidnapped him, which is a symbol of sovereignty, and none of these Gulf countries cared about it, right? So this has nothing to do with the sovereignty of Lebanon, the statement of George Kardahi, the Minister of Information, about the war of Yemen. This is about the struggle of power between Saudi Arabia, the UAE on one side, and on the other side is Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and Iran. So I mentioned the president of Lebanon, Michel Aoun. I'm giving you some context for you to get the bigger picture of what's happening, because this context you will not hear it from the mainstream media or any other media. So Michel Aoun, the president of Lebanon, he is in power since 2016. Okay, and he's part of the Free Patriotic Movement, as I mentioned, which is the biggest Christian bloc in Lebanon. And there is his presidency is called the Strong Covenant. And since he ascended power in 2016, troubles erupted in Lebanon, triggered by the so-called civil society, the NGOs. They tried to create a hard time for Michel Aoun. Why? Because before 2006 war by Israel against Lebanon, Hezbollah and the Free Patriotic Movement in early 2016, they came together and they made an alliance, which is called Mar Mikhael Agreement. Okay, and this Mar Mikhael Agreement between Hezbollah and the Free Patriotic Movement gave both sides a stronger political leverage over Lebanon, because Hezbollah is the biggest Shiite political party, and the Free Patriotic Movement is the biggest Christian political party, right? And this 2006 agreement was, Israel attacked Lebanon in mid-2016, trying to break also this agreement between the Christian side and the Shiite side in Lebanon. But the most important thing that happened it was in 2011, when the so-called Arab Spring erupted, and especially the war on Syria. Let's remember that these radical groups in Syria, they also infiltrated Lebanon and they tried to invade Lebanon, and nobody fought against them. In fact, this so-called 14 March coalition, which is a pro-Saudi Arabia and pro the United States and pro-Israel, they didn't fight against ISIS, al-Nusra, who invaded their territory. In fact, they were supporting these radical groups in Syria and in parallel in Lebanon as well, right? This is the truth of the matter. If you followed the developments underground, we all know this. This is a common knowledge. So the Christians of Syria were under huge pressure, and a lot of them migrated or escaped or became refugees because of these terrorist groups in Syria. And just to give you an example, around 100,000 Armenians were living in Syria before 2011. The numbers are now below 20,000 in Syria. How did that happen? What happened to the Christians of Iraq after the 2003 invasion? Hundreds of thousands of them became refugees, right? So Michel Aoun, who was a military commander during the civil war of Lebanon, and he has a geopolitical mastermind, he calculated well, and he thought that it's the best option for him to make an alliance with Hezbollah, which is a strong political and military force that can protect the Christians of Lebanon if something bad happens. And this is what happened when the jihadists invaded Lebanon. It was Hezbollah who went to the borders and defended the country against the terrorists, because the Lebanese army, although it wanted to defend the country, but there was a political veto against the Lebanese army to go and defend the country. And this political veto comes from the 14 March coalition, which is the pro-Saudi Arabia and pro-United States bloc. So we have the 8 March coalition, which is Hezbollah, Free Patriotic Movement, Amal, and their allies. And we have the 14 March, which is the Future Movement and the Phalanges and the Lebanese Forces Party and the rest of the allies who are pro, as I mentioned, the United States and pro-Saudi Arabia, right? So all these regional developments now is to break this alliance between the Free Patriotic Movement and Hezbollah, because when Hezbollah has the biggest Christian bloc in Lebanon on its back, this gives also Hezbollah not only a domestic political legitimacy, but also international legitimacy. Why? If the Christians of Lebanon, or the most Christians of Lebanon, are in alliance with Hezbollah and saying that Hezbollah is protecting us, what can Europe and the United States say regarding the Christians of the region, right? They cannot claim that they're protecting them, or even France, which always claims that they're protecting the Christians or the Maronites, the Catholics of Lebanon. So Michel Aoun came to power after 10 years of this alliance with Hezbollah in 2016, and in 2017 troubles erupted in Lebanon. And this is something that I want to explain because I need you to understand this carefully. So we have this 8 March coalition, the Hezbollah, the Free Patriotic Movement, pro-Iran, pro-Syria, right? And then we have the 14 March coalition, which is pro-United States and pro-Saudi Arabia. These two were always clashing together. But among these two political blocs, there was a new bloc being constructed or prepared by also the allies of Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel in Lebanon. And this is the so-called civil society, the people of the NGOs. So these people called for a revolution against they said against the whole political system. And they said, Kullon yani kullon, which means we want to remove all of them. But let's think about this practically now. Some people will say, why would the United States want to remove its allies, the 14 March coalition, by a revolution? I would say because if both 8 March and 14 March coalition are gone, and which includes Hezbollah, that is the concern of the United States and Israel, the United States will be satisfied, because the third way, which is the civil society, is also pro the United States, which is this neoliberal fifth column that I call people in Lebanon. So if a revolution means destroying both blocks, the United States won't mind. There will be this third way, which is the people of the civil society, that they say we're pro-human rights, we're pro-democracy. You know, all these cliches from Ukraine to Syria and all these color revolutions that happened. And this civil society, they truly paralyzed the country, paralyzed the economy. I'm not saying that they did it just single-handedly, but the movement that they are leading in Lebanon, they blocked all the roads, they blocked all the banks and banking systems, they paralyzed the economy, and they crumbled the currency. Just before 2017 or before 2018, before these troubles, $1 used to be 1,500 Lebanese lira. It's now 20,000 Lebanese lira. So you can see it's like 20 times, around 20 times more now. The economy is worsened. And because Syrians, a lot of Syrian businessmen were, their money was in Lebanese banks, because the banking system in Syria is also sanctioned, their money is gone. Their money is gone. And here, only here, because of this so-called revolution in Lebanon, where Syrians have around $50 to $60 billion in Lebanese banks, their money is gone. The banks are closed. The bank is telling you now, the Lebanese banks are telling you, if you accept 30% of your initial money, we can give you $1, or we can give you only $1,000 by a Lebanese lira, the equivalent of a Lebanese lira, per month. So you choose. I know friends that they have money in Lebanon that they cannot take back their money anymore. So this so-called revolution, color revolution that happened in Lebanon has destroyed not only the Lebanese currency, but also the Syrian currency. So you can see the pattern there, right? Now, some people are asking me about the Syrian relations with the UAE, and they're saying, how can Syria have now good relations? I mentioned that a few times. Syria wants to have good relations with the UAE and wants to have good relations with Saudi Arabia because of the Turkish invasion of the Syrian territories, and because Syria needs an Arabic backing for its struggle against Turkey, and at the same time needs a financial backing too. Syria is not a superpower. It's not like it can survive alone. Syria needs always to have alliances and friends and partnerships. But this doesn't mean in any way that this will be on the expense of the Syria's major alliances with Iran and Hezbollah and etc. And I'm not talking now as in my personal opinion. This is Syrian principle. Syria always, even before the war, they had good relations with Turkey. They had good relations with Qatar. They had good relations with Saudi Arabia. They had good relations with Iran, and they had good relations with Hezbollah. Syria likes to play this balancing force in the regions, and it should be so. So I tried to follow up on the previous video, which was also about Lebanon. I lived in Lebanon for a few years and studied there, so I pretty know well the political structure there and the social structures as well. I hope this video was beneficial for you. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like as well, so that the algorithm of YouTube can help me. You can help me to get in on the top of the list of the suggested videos of YouTube. And if you want to support Syriana Analysis financially, you can become a patron. The link in the description below. You can just pay $2 per month, and it's a really big help for me. And see you next time.